And from empathy, you know how to communicate, you know what the emotions are that they're feeling, and you know what you need to provide to them. That is marketing. You can come up with the best strategies. That's the easy part, is around your strategies and your go-to-market and what channels you're going to leverage. The hard part is it really is getting to the core of what motivates a person to want to use your product.
Get ready for the Product Tea with Leah, your fun-sized dose of business, tech, growth, and product chatter. I'm your host, Leah, and it's time to spill the tea. There it is. Welcome to the Product Tea. Today, we spill the tea with someone who probably dreams about marketing in her sleep. Currently rocking the CMO role at DexCare, she's turning healthcare digital before most of us have had our morning coffee. We both worked 2010 on Microsoft in different locations and learned firsthand how things can get out of hand in fun ways in the same time where Microsoft Surface, Windows Vista, and other fun projects were hitting the scene. She's a storytelling sorceress who has made everything from tech to textbooks sizzle, which is funny that I'm stumbling over this particular word because I have dyslexia. Welcome to the Product Tea, Jamie Gier. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. Thank you, Leah. What a nice introduction. And a little bit of a walk down memory lane, too, with Microsoft. Feels so long ago.
Yeah, very good. How would you rate this introduction from 1 to full-blown funded marketing campaign with a lot of lead backflow?
Well, if it's on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being excellent, I'd say 10 and a half. There you go.
Correct. You can stay on the podcast. Very good to hear from you. What do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
I think what they get wrong about me up front is that I'm pretty reserved. But once you start having a conversation with me, I'm very down to earth, very down to earth. And I love to get real. You know, I think sometimes people have the impression that somebody that is in the C-suite are always so buttoned up. That's not the case.
Yeah, we just don't have time. We just don't have time to be social. That's the thing, right?
That's right.
We just don't have the time to be friendly. Hey, I would like to enjoy this moment, but I don't have time. Okay, I talk to you later.
That's right. No, and being approachable is very important to me. I love shooting the shit with people and just swapping a good story over a beer or a glass of wine.
Yeah, it is very rare that I have CMOs here that are not like this. That's usually CMOs are really easy to interact with, and I think it's one of the positive traits of the job as well. Jamie, is there something that you are afraid of right now in the industry or personal life or whatever? Like, is there something that bothers you right now?
I think it's something that's bothered me all the time, which is what I do good enough? I'm probably my worst critic. And so I'm always trying to raise the bar in what I do and my performance. And I don't think I've ever gotten to a place where I've been able to do a victory lap and feel good. Somebody might give me accolades, but I'm always the one going, gosh, was that good enough? And have I done enough? And sometimes I think I might undersell my value. I don't know. Is that imposter syndrome?
I think it kind of is. And I think it's interesting that you're mentioning this because 3 days ago I was with my therapist, and at the end of the session, she said that, you know what we're going to work on? And I said, like, what are we going to work on? And then she said, yeah, we're going to work on you being nicer to yourself. And then I'm like, I'm always conflicted about this because I feel like I'm good at my job because I think I'm not good at my job, which makes me always go the extra mile. I just do not go to sleep until I'm like, now I nailed it, right? Like now it was really good enough. Now they got the value. And I'm not sure, like, you know, is this kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy? Is this a weird dynamic where you have to underestimate yourself to overperform? I don't know. I really don't know. But I find it an interesting thing. No.
Well, funny about that. So we're two peas in a pod. I had a coaching session last week, and this is exactly the thing that we focused on. And my homework assignment is to write down everything that I feel proud about and that I feel like I've accomplished, and to keep revisiting that over and over, which it feels weird. Like I'm not good at that. I'm just not good at it, but I'm going to go through the exercise because I think it's important that you do take those victory laps and you do acknowledge.
I think I started to get better when it comes to being proud retroactively, you know, like on my overall kind of achievements. That stuff I kind of recognize in some way. But whenever I'm in the moment, there are just these days where everything is just like going so bad. You just think like, Why is anyone paying me for anything? What is this? But yeah, it's funny how the perception of this is just like really, really difficult to get right. And yeah, I think I'm not sure whether I talked with you about this, but I think this is what really makes good friendships. This is the part about friendships and makes them good. If you have someone from giving you an external perspective that is honest and it's just telling you, like, hey, you know what, Leah, you know what? This kind of thing that you did last week, you sucked. Or the other way around, hey, this was actually really good, even though you think that it sucked and so forth. So, and I really, really appreciate this as well, especially in a professional field. I never got around like you, where I was just like, I'm sure about myself. It just never
Well,
worked.
I don't know that I'm there yet either, but it's good to be, by the way, it's good to be surrounded by people. I call it your personal board of directors, but it's good to have people around you that will tell it like it is, including giving you a pat on the back. I mean, it could be lonely
No.
at the top sometimes. And again, if you're an overachiever and you're your worst critic or toughest critic, then it can be challenging to ever feel like you've accomplished enough or did enough or provided enough value. And maybe on one hand, Leah, it's good because you keep striving. On the other hand, it can lead to burnout.
Yeah, it absolutely can. I can attest to that fact. I pulled I pulled the brakes luckily last year in time, but it was close. It was close. It
Yeah.
happens very fast. Jamie, can you really briefly introduce yourself to the audience? I completely forgot about this. Can you actually introduce yourself with in like 2 to 3 sentences who you are and what you do, and then we jump right into the main topic?
Okay. Well, professionally, I'm a chief marketing officer for B2B SaaS companies, most recently with DexCare, which is an early stage digital health company serving health systems and providers. When I am not chief marketing officer, I am chief mom officer to a energetic, totally rad, almost 17-year-old boy who is the light of my life and inspires me every day.
Are you running marketing campaigns with him so he does the stuff that he doesn't want to do? Or like, can you use any of your skills from the job? Or are you doing the stuff that you learn with him in the job? It's the other way around.
You know what? The funny thing
Yeah.
is, so we're kind of in that phase of his life where he's evaluating colleges, but what he's
Yeah.
doing simultaneously is seeing if he can skip that and just go right into being an entrepreneur. So he is standing up his own website. You'll love this, Leah. He's getting into pet products. So I just looked at my whiteboard because he said, Mom, I need a name for my company. And I said, well, let me help you with that because that's a whole other thing. And I just looked at my whiteboard because every now and again he comes to my office and he writes things down, largely motivational, but I just now see his names on here.
Maybe we can pick for him. And this is to kickstart his company when this episode
I
comes out.
know. Well, because you and I are both cat people. I mean, I love dogs, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
cats don't get nearly enough the same attention as dogs. But there's some good names. I'm actually impressed with my son and what he came up with.
Oh, that's good. Okay. No, that's really nice. So let's hope that the product behind it is also good because that leads us now exactly to the actual problem of this particular episode. When we started to talk, I think last week you said it was everything is a haze in my life right now. So I trust you on this. I think the first time when we talked a week ago, we talked about our time in Microsoft. Now, we did not work together, but we were at Microsoft at the same time. I was in Switzerland. You were in Redmond, if I remember correctly. And we were talking about these fun stories. I don't want to get too much now into detail because I think I rolled it out already like 3 times on the podcast, where specifically at Microsoft back in the day, we had this funny budget allocation and really weird incentives for organizations where we just started to use money in the dumbest way possible. And basically, what happened is we had too much money at the end of the quarter. We had to spend it somewhere because if you didn't spend it, then you didn't get it in the next quarter. Because God forbid we have too much money left at the end of the quarter. So we started to spend it on really, really stupid stuff. And this kind of, we laughed about it last week, but it kind of hints at a bigger problem with marketing, right? Like there's a good side of marketing and then there's a bad side of marketing. I think nobody denies that we need marketing in a company, but then there's also like the ugly side sometimes if we set incentives wrong, if we think about marketing in the wrong way, that it turns into kind of a bad gig. What are your thoughts on this? Like, just like conceptually, how do you bring this together also, like in the company? How do you tell people how to work with marketing as well? Like, specifically, I have a lot of listeners who are founders themselves. Some of them are a bit skeptical towards marketing, like, oh, yeah, okay, that's like the paid channels, and that's kind of it. What does a good marketing function do in 2024 in your estimation?
I think you have to be able to link what we do to business impact, whether it's creating pipeline, attaching to revenue. And what has changed, Leah, over the last 10 years, maybe 15 years, is that now you can measure and track our impact more so than you're able to do even when I first got into marketing. And so there was always this, we're making investments in marketing around brand and direct mail and events, but we didn't have the technology at that time to really be able to track and tell a story around the impact that those investments were having on the business. Today, we have access to so much technology. Actually, it's overwhelming. I mean, the massive amount of data that we collect as marketers and to show the value that we do provide to a business and to a marketplace. So we've shifted from not really being able to show quantifiably our impact to now having so much data that we can. So that's one shift that I just want to mention because I think it does impact, the question around what does marketing do and how do you show its value? We have the means to be able to show it. But I've always viewed marketing as that strategic lever out ahead of sales that kind of sits squarely between product and all of your commercial organizations. And we're basically informing product strategy in terms of what are the
Yeah.
requirements of the customer. And then how do you package and position that and ensure that all of your commercial facing teams know how to do so that they have a unified voice to the marketplace. So we play a really pivotal role, both what I call upstream to your product counterparts and downstream to every customer facing team, whether they're focused on the customer, whether they're focused on acquiring new business, it's your demand gen team. So we play a very strategic role. Now, the problem is that a lot of the times marketers are pigeonholed into one area, that they're not allowed to have true governance over that function and to show the strategy, the strategic nature behind what we do. So either we're demand gen, or we're digital, or we're just product marketing, but collectively, we just help the business grow and scale.
I find this a very good point, and I wanted to ask you about something very, very specific. I already have like an entire page of notes. So here we go. If you think about a very typical and very practical Q1 goal that you would put to your marketing teams, how far would this go? So, like, I'm always interested in a discussion on, like, okay, so we say that we want to kind of measure the impact on revenue. Fair enough. All of this is good. How far do we go with marketing tracking? And this is especially like in the light of how should other functions work with good marketing teams as well, very, very relevant. So how far do we measure? Do we measure the amount of traffic that marketing brings? Do we measure the amount of MQLs that they bring? Do we measure the revenue that is resulting overall in the company from particular traffic? How do you think about this? And like, can you maybe give us also an example goal that you're using in your organization to track this? Like, so how do you think about this? Because I always struggle with how far should you go? Because some of it is outside of the control of marketing, especially when it's inside of the product.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm a B2B marketer. And so what I do is not transactional in nature. It's not a high volume. A lot of the times our
Hmm.
sales cycles are very lengthy. In the case of the company that I'm at now, it could be 12 to 18 months. And so, yes, website traffic, we do measure it as a channel, but it's not the only thing that we're doing. That's just indicating whether our campaigns are effective at driving eyes to the places that we need to be seen and be visible. What I measure my teams on is, are we engaging the right buyers and moving and progressing them through a cycle where they know who we are, they're considering us, and we can get them handed off to sales as a legitimate opportunity. And so for me, it's how much pipeline are we creating for our sales team? So even at DexCare, I have a target for that. I'm on the hook to create pipeline for our commercial organization and a set number of opportunities that can be handed off to our commercial team. I do follow the progression because I do believe that the more qualified they are, if marketing has done its job and we're handing over really qualified pipeline, that's going to convert at a higher rate. And I'm also on the hook for closed won revenue as a result of the pipeline that we are generating, largely
Yeah.
around marketing sourced. But it's not, we can't get into this, is it marketing sourced or not? Because the reality is any demand that we're creating and capturing and converting, whether it was originally sourced from us or not, we've influenced in some way. And by the way, Leah, marketing's job does not stop once you hand over demand to your commercial team. We follow it through. This is where I love product marketing. They're in there helping to take, a handful of opportunities and really personalize the experience and solution around that opportunity and getting them closed. So for me, I base it off of pipeline contribution and closed won opportunities. All of the channels that we use are designed to do that based on what we know about the buyers and how they consume and source information and want to be in a relationship with our company.
I think it's interesting because I always have this kind of pull, and there's a very, very clear gap between the functions inside of a company. So, like between marketing and product, and between product and sales. So, why do we even try to attribute revenue to any function? Well, because we want to know what's efficient, what can we optimize, and so forth. All of this kind of makes sense. So, the way that we try to combat this also in product like growth and more of the, I would say, like the smaller deal companies, let's say like mid markets on like lead times of like 6 to 8 months or and so forth, is we try to bring growth teams that go a little bit over everything. And I think it goes also a little bit into your direction. In any case, what I say to product teams in 2024, for all that matters, like going forward, is that as a product team, it's not good enough anymore if you produce something and then hand it off to marketing and say, now sell it. Because that's usually very much what happens, right? So like we also have this other story that kind of backfires. I actually expect from product teams to know much more about marketing in a way that you said, right? So like product marketing, because how good can you be in producing something if you don't know how it is meant to be sold? So marketing should be much more involved much, much earlier in the building process as well. And frankly, I do not want to see any business case of any feature in a company that does not consider what it means for the marketing side, like SEO content and so forth, like new keywords. Does this have an impact on the conferences that we can drive wherever your lead gen is kind of happening? And I feel like so far, no team in the company really takes the responsibility for doing this. Like in a lot of companies, marketing is just looking at what is the marketing opportunity. Product just looks at product, and sales just looks at monetization. But there's no one that kind of pulls it together. So I think we try to combat this with these growth teams that are just much more cross-functional. Do you have a take on this?
I do actually.
Go for it.
I do, because what I just described felt very much that it was focused on my downstream partners around commercial. I cannot legit capture demand for our company if there's not product market fit. And so this is where now, if I pivot towards looking upstream, where I can feed back to my product teams, what are we hearing from our own prospects and our buyers and our customers too? What are the features and capabilities that they need to be successful in the jobs that they have to get done every day? And how does marketing feed that back up into our product teams? So as much as I sit on pipeline calls and I look specifically at organizations that are in play with us, I'm equally involved in all of the product discussions. In fact, my first strategic hire at DexCare was a director of product marketing, because I knew that we would need to have impact around influencing the roadmap based on what we know about our buyers, but also being able to translate what those features and capabilities mean to our buyers in the ways that they know that it's solving a problem for them. We know that based on your role and what you have to do in an organization, especially for a lengthy sales cycle and one that has a buying committee made up of 10 people, your messaging is nuanced around those different roles. So here's an example of that happened when I was at Dreambox. Dreambox is a K through 8 digital math program that supplements what kids are learning in the classroom. And it was built to personalize the learning experience based on how kids actually learn math. We know all kids learn differently. When COVID hit, and this is when I was at Dreambox, we were largely serving schools and districts. So we were selling our software as an enterprise and a commercial play. We did have a way for parents, if they couldn't get access to Dreambox through their school, they can pay a monthly subscription to have access to that for their child. But it was a channel that when we decided to go enterprise that we kind of neglected. So I joined, COVID hits, and all of these kids are now in a remote learning situation. Schools and districts are trying to figure out, how do we pivot from in-classroom instruction to now being at home and having to go into
Mhm.
kind of this digital world. It was a perfect moment for Dreambox because we could do that. But what happened, Leah, was that channel that went direct to the parents where they could go online and buy a subscription. We had neglected that online product, that consumer product, if you will. The code was 10 years old. So here we have this moment to really serve families and kids during a crisis, during a pandemic. And marketing came in, worked with product, and said, we have an opportunity here to do the right thing as we're working with schools to ensure that their now remote classrooms can continue to use Dreambox to ensure that kids don't slip and fall behind in math. We have a lot of families that don't have access to it through their schools. So, how do we solve for some of the old code that we need to address and quickly go out to those families and let them know that we're here and offer them an online subscription to our product? So, we saw the opportunity. We worked with product to fast track and engineering, by the way. This is an engineering play, but we saw marketing saw the moment to serve at a moment in crisis. We went to our product team and said, hey, we need to kind of pivot the roadmap, get people focused on updating our online product and get this out as quickly as possible. And it became this marketing, product, and engineering working towards a good for the organization and giving family access to it. But it started with marketing. We identified a need and we were able to coalesce and get everyone aligned around it and update 10-year-old code. And it was really successful. We
Mhm.
were able to reach a number of families and ensure that their kids would be taken care of if they couldn't access a math platform through their own school. So maybe that's not influencing the roadmap as much as it's saying we need you to focus here because this is a moment in time that we
Yeah.
have to do the right thing. And that came from the marketing organization.
I think this is incredibly important because if you look at it on a flow chart, like marketing sends a message and then the customer goes into the product, you would think that this is an easy thing, right? So, like, you have marketing and then there's an arrow pointing to product, done, right? In this little arrow, this handoff from the messaging to the product, if you don't do what you just explained, this gets very rough, right? So, like, customers do not really get what is being promised in the message. Like, it just does not really feel good. Product feels like that marketing is selling something that is probably not there, and so forth, right? So, like, there's a lot of problems in there. I wanted to run something by you. I don't know whether this now goes a little bit too far, but so I work a lot with companies around product-led growth, where we talk about how much can we give as value before we actually monetize anything. And one of the more interesting concepts that I started to also apply for marketing is to kind of to find an aha moment company wide for our ICPs, where we just say, like, okay, these are the best buyers that we have, of course, the classical ICP research. But if they do a very specific action in the product, then we consider them to have reached the aha moment and now they know what we are about. This is way before monetization. It actually turns out that if you incentivize marketing and growth teams, whatever you consider now to be acquisition and now product, the lines become blurry anyways. But if you start to incentivize these teams, instead of like saying, hey, this is how much LQLs that you are generating or like how much revenue, because sometimes you cannot cover the entire thing. What we care about is how many people you bring to us that are reaching the aha moment. Because if you bring us crap traffic, these people will not go through because they will notice that while they're in the process, this is not for me. And I find this a very, very interesting approach. I don't know whether you have an opinion on this, but I find this a very good kind of compromise when you cannot go like the full 12 yards. Because specifically what you said, like if you have lead times of like 12 to 18 months, it is very, very difficult to kind of attribute this as well, right? Like we always want to
Right.
know, like, oh, yeah, this was the marketing message. This is what everything that started. No, this was Gary, the sales guy, who was responsible for it. I feel that this is a very honest kind of way where you kind of at least have a good trigger for marketing that seems to go deep enough because it also requires some engineering effort exactly in the way that you just described it. So I really, really like this example.
Okay. And so in the case of Dreambox, when we did pivot and we went from enterprise to now reinvigorating our consumer channel, I mean, that was just doing the right thing. And by the way, we offered it for free. There were so many companies coming in and profiting off of a pandemic that we did not want to be the vulture circling around and trying to swoop in. In fact, our stance was just open this up to families in need. And we even did it for schools and districts too. So we offered up a freemium. So this gets to product-led growth. How does somebody, but it wasn't designed for lead generation. Let's just be very clear. But what ended up happening is that can't offer a product for free forever. And so we did have a conversion strategy, after 60 days. In B2B, it's harder to do that with a freemium. So what we typically do is a pilot. When I was at Xeros, so Xeros has a no-code platform for creating interactive content for people like me that can't get in, and a lot of platforms require a front-end web developer. This is one that you didn't need to have. You can go in and create really highly interactive experiences. But we offered a pilot. Pilot was just a couple $1,000s, and it gave them 60 days access to create experiences. And then we would then convert them into a full paid license. I was metriced on how many pilots because it became a high conversion tactic for us. So from that standpoint, product-led growth on pilots was our way of offering a freemium product. But because you have to still, you got to recoup some of your cost of getting them ready and building, we had to charge a minimal amount for a pilot.
Yeah. This makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to also attach another thing to this. Also, like when we talk about product-led growth and product-led sales in the context of B2B, I still think it is important to make the case what something like this can do for you as a company, even if there is no profit behind it. The one thing that you get if you expose your product in some kind of free way, even if you do not directly monetize it, is it gets exposed to much more users than you would otherwise, which means that your interface also becomes better. I don't know whether you remember Microsoft Dynamics and Salesforce back in the days when, like all these CRM solutions that were just, I'm just going to say this as an ex-Microsoft employee, our interface was shit. I'm sorry. It was just not good. And one of the reasons for this is that even as Microsoft and like a very like upmarket company, you just do not have that many users to test on. And it was just not that important to make it very easy to use. The integrations were more important, like we always had enterprise clients. You had to at least pay, I don't know how much money and so forth. But like, this is one of the effects of this. This is why I also try to encourage companies at the very, very least. There's very, very few companies, even in the highest enterprise segments. You should have at least an interactive demo where you can measure what's happening inside, like where do people go? How do they click around and so forth? At the very, very least, because this data helps you to make the product better, even if you're not selling over it. So I like the point that you made there.
Going back to that, so that, there's a lot around usability testing and stuff. Of course, if they're not going to have a good experience, they're not going to want to come back and actually pay for a shitty experience. I remember Microsoft had usability labs, and you could sign up to be part of that program and come out, test their products, and then you would have access to the Microsoft store and go buy software in a box. I mean, you remember that on CDs? But
I had unironically 10 boxed versions of Microsoft Vista in this little storage compartment over there, like the really thick ones, and I got rid of them like 3 months ago.
That's funny. We got to keep these archives. But to your point, that to be product led, you have to create an exceptional experience for those that are going to use it because they have choice, and every industry raises the bar for another industry, and it's even true in my own. I mean, we're on the very front end of ensuring that hospitals get discovered when somebody's searching for care and having the ability for a consumer to find the right physician and navigate them to best fit care options. That experience has been shaped and designed by every other industry but healthcare. And healthcare is now having to come in and play catch up. It's not even transformational. It is modernizing an antiquated system and process by which people can engage with their health systems in a digital way. And so even matching your experience based on what people have come to know and to expect, that piece is really, really important. Otherwise, the sales are not going to come. And so from that standpoint, the product-led growth is so important, more so than ever.
There is an interesting story on this because I started as a UX engineer decades ago. I always love when I can talk about experiences that I had decades ago. It does not make me feel old at all. So, one of the interesting bits is when you said healthcare, this is such a fascinating story. So, we used to do some study around how nurses are kind of administering medication to patients. And this was not that long ago. I think that was about 10 years ago or something. We already started to have mobile devices, like tablets and so forth. And the way that this worked is that when you try to administer something that was dangerous in combination with something else, you got a warning on the screen and so forth. Like some practical stuff.
Yeah.
What
Hmm.
always happens in these highly regulated industries, because the interfaces are just so bad, is that there's a lot of functionality in there that has to be in there for legal reasons. And one of the things that we started to notice is that, oh, whenever someone is picking this particular medication, you need to show a warning window that says this and this and this and this and this, which is a lot of legalese, a lot of bullshit that just absolutely no one reads anymore, guaranteed. What happened with time is that people started to click away warning windows because 99% of the time they were actually irrelevant. And they looked exactly the same as the warning windows that I told you before that are highly relevant. You should not combine this medication with each other. And this is one of these things where this is why we have cookie banners and consent for stuff that absolutely no one reads anymore. EULAs that nobody reads, but you kind of legally have to provide anyways, and so forth. I dream of a future where this garbage is just gone. It makes everything worse. We already have advertisements everywhere. So
Oh gosh, and Meta is the worst anymore. I'm so done with, well, I guess formerly known as Facebook, but that's interesting that you bring that up because I was in that space and I had worked for a company that was in clinical decision support, but in our biggest fear was around, we called it alert fatigue.
yeah.
As all these alerts come up and your clinicians, whether you're a nurse or a physician or a pharmacist, these alerts pop up and it can fatigue one during the workflow of trying to provide patient care to somebody. But this is, to your point, an industry that, because of the regulations around
Mhm.
and reimbursement of how care gets paid and all of the different stakeholders, I mean, it's so complicated that when you do have people coming into it, a lot of the innovation is stifled for those very reasons, but for good reasons. I mean, you don't want a patient getting the wrong medication, and you want to make sure that it's prescribed at the level that they need to, or that there's access to information, that every clinician has the same access to the information of a patient that they're all working with. So it's highly complicated, which is also why I think when new entrants like a Microsoft or a Google or anyone tries to get into it, there's a reality check for them of how complicated it is simply because we've made it that way. It's structured that way. Actually, healthcare is what led me to Microsoft because they did try to get into it at the time that you were there and I was there. And because we were doing some novel, more progressive things, we were actually in the R&D organization and we're testing and piloting and building some new things. But for those that had not had the healthcare experience, it was kind of a rude awakening of, wow, this is really complicated. But anything would be complicated if life or death you know, is a reality.
Yeah, and I think there's a jaded perspective to this as well. I think I wanted to say two things to that. So, like, first of all, like at that time, Microsoft really got a bad rap. Like, this was the height of like, oh, Apple versus Microsoft. Like Microsoft, like this. We started to get like this really, how do you say, it, dusty kind of thing. Like it's like Microsoft is just like this shitty company, and Apple is the ones with the iPod and so forth.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I'm a PC and I'm a Mac commercial. Do you
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
that?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. But like in truth, we also spoke about this, right? So like the company was highly innovative, specifically like with multi-touch devices and some other stuff. Like that was just absolutely crazy. I think to your point with healthcare as well, I think this goes really back to this kind of thing that I'm a firm believer that 90% of the problems in a company can be solved with correct incentivization, which is in the power of leadership. And I think in healthcare, because it is about life and death, you could think that it is about healing people. But I don't think actually that this is the case for most healthcare software and provisions or like services that are being provided. It mostly is about covering legal liabilities. Like you don't want it to be your fault, even though it just deteriorates overall, probably the experience of everyone. Maybe it even kills more people, but in the case that it actually does, we warned you, right? So like, yeah, but I did not see the warning. Yeah, but we warned you. Like we warned you like 100 times. And like nobody's reading that. Yeah, but like we warned you. It's not our fault. And I think this really goes a little bit into this, that we just like sometimes incentivize the wrong things. And maybe it is a stretch now, but like healthcare and legal as well, just legal in general, my absolute hate domain, contracts, anything. If your incentivization is wrong, it should not be a surprise that your stuff turns out this way. That's just a natural progression. Yeah.
It is. And you want to make sure that patients are protected and, that it's always do no harm, right? That's the first rule in healthcare as a clinician. But we're also a very litigious, I would say, country, but I know in the world, because you're not here in the US, but you have to be very, very careful because,
We hear
yeah,
the story.
yeah. And by the way, the other piece of this too, when you think about just product, clinicians got into healthcare to have a relationship with their patients and make sure that they can heal them and keep them healthy. They didn't get into it to do a bunch of documentation and sit at a computer and type away at a computer as they're trying to provide care. And the massive amount of documentation now that is required in order to get paid and to make sure that there's a good record. Inherently, there's a lot of good things in what we've done specifically in modernizing healthcare around technology. But there's also consequences to that as well. And we have to be mindful of it. But it's a heavily regulated industry, largely for the right reasons. But we also have to acknowledge that those things can actually get in the way of progressing where we need to be and ensuring that people get access to care.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And if we zoom out a little bit more from the healthcare side to also like in general, like as a business, I think you have a lot of control over what's happening in your company as well. Like, like how you treat people and so forth. I think there's much more ownership that should go towards leadership if a culture in a company is bad, right? Like it does not need to be always about lives of people. It can also be like, how do you treat people? I think one particular example that always comes to mind in the US is that I think you have an average cancellation period if someone is getting fired, but for like 2 weeks. And obviously, this stems a specific behavior, right? So, like, people are starting to be careful about what they say towards the employer, right? Like, it is being hard to be more risky in being honest and so forth. Whereas here in Europe, I mean, in Switzerland, I can tell you that it takes 3 months from the moment where I'm getting fired before I even go in the earliest, right? Like sometimes even 6 months. And I think all of this comes down to if you do cut costs, at some point you're going to pay in a different currency back.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, this always comes back, I think. Can I ask you a more broader question in
Yeah.
regards to the marketing side? Like, let's say, so I usually have product people, founders, entrepreneurs, and so forth that are listening to this particular podcast. Do you have a concept of how someone should learn marketing in regards to without becoming a marketer? But like, let's say you had to, I don't know whether it's one resource or like the conceptual side or whatever, but like, what are the things that you should look into when you want to learn much more about marketing and how to structure it to do good marketing instead of just like, the bad marketing that just happens a little bit? Like, how would you recommend to someone to dive into this particular topic? Other than,
Oh
of
gosh.
course, talking to you.
Yeah, there's so much to that because what marketing looks like for a Series A company is going to be very different than what it looks like, say, for a Series C. And I'm a Series C right now. I think it's for me, and why I love the industry that I'm in, because it's taught me a lot about marketing that I think the more high volume transactional type of B2C companies miss. Those companies are really good at measuring to the nth degree everything. I think what they've lost that B2B marketing understands is the power of relationships. It's the power of really understanding the psychology of the human connection and why that matters to even what products you build and making sure that there's product market fit because you understand the jobs that need to be done versus how you message to a human being to make sure that it connects with them, not just the mind, but the heart. And then also how you just build a relationship over time of trust, because in B2B, it's all about trust. But I think that there's a lot there that B2C businesses can learn as well. I've always was like, there's so much we can learn from B2C companies. In fact, I need to make sure that even though I'm a B2B marketer, I'm going to hire B2C talent because, wow, they're some of the most creative people. And by the way, they are. But they have a lot to learn from B2B marketers too around buyer psychology and how do you sustain a relationship with somebody over a long haul. In healthcare, we call it a marriage because we are in it for the long haul. It's not something that you can go in and rip and replace a technology solution that you've sold. And so, from that standpoint, the relationship is much longer. So, what I would say to kind of come back, because I wanted to provide that context, is if somebody really wants to understand the value of marketing and what I think that we're good at, it is how do you connect with people to get them to want to do business with you in the first place? And it becomes a conversation around having something of value that you're offering to them and making them better at what they do every single day, whatever occupation that they might have. And then that even gets into where do they go to get information? How often do you need to reach out to them and engage them to even get them to remember who you are? There's the memorability around your brand and how you do that. But I will always, Leah, come back to understanding the person that will ultimately buy your brand or your product, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think I can subscribe to this. And I think it's funny because when I was trying to learn much more about marketing for myself, just because I'm by trade a product person, I got recommended all the books from Philip Kotler, like Marketing 4.5 and 4.0 and whatever it was called and so forth. But I think on the conceptual side, the resource that has given me the most was how HubSpot was writing about how to create inbound. And just like in general, how the function of marketing is not necessarily to convince people to come, but to really, with marketing, generate value for people that is relevant to the customers that we want to have in the future without normally talking about, oh, we are the best at this, right? So, like, if you have healthcare providers, then you try to solve healthcare provider problems with the content that you have for free, if you want to call it, right? It's almost like an extension of your product. And then if you do this on a continuous basis, then people really start to build trust that, hey, you guys actually understand our industry. And this gives me much more trust that you therefore the product is also a good thing. And I think this is a very powerful message for marketing in general as a conceptual side, because there is no way that you're going to create value for anyone that you do not understand. You cannot just like go to ChatGPT and say like, hey, this is our target customer, write me a couple of good guides. That just does not work anymore. You need to do
No,
research and you need to understand them. It just does not possible. So I think it's a proof that you do understand people and people really value this much more so today than in the past, because now it's commoditized. You have choice and you're going to go to those that understand.
you're going to go to people that you understand and that you trust. That is so big. And here's how this kind of came into play even for me when I jumped industries for a moment in my career. So after having spent 20 years in healthcare, when I went to
Mm,
Dreambox, and that was education technology, that was the first time I went into a new industry. There's a lot of parallels behind it, but you know what made me successful at helping that company grow? And they had a very successful run. They're still in the marketplace now, owned by another company. I simply put myself in the shoes of those that we knew were helping and solving a
mhm.
problem for. And in this case, I put my parent hat on. The fact that I could walk in the shoes of a parent and understand the importance of ensuring that kids have access to math, even when we were looking to reinvigorate our consumer channel, it was easy because I was already walking down that path as a parent. I knew what they were feeling at that moment in time. I
No,
knew what a teacher was feeling at that moment in time. That develops empathy. And from empathy, you know how to communicate, you know what the emotions are that they're feeling, and you know what you need to
no.
provide to them. That is marketing. You can come up with the best strategies. That's the easy part, is around your strategies and your go to market and what channels you're going to leverage. The hard part is it really is getting to the core of what motivates a person to
Yeah.
want to or want to use your product.
Yeah. Knowing your customer.
Yeah. It is. And we learned that. We learned that in school. We learned
Yeah.
that. I mean, it just, and I think sometimes too, we get enamored with our own product and the latest and greatest, the cool, like even with AI, we're all looking at ways to use AI. And I'm like, well, what's motivating you to want to use AI? What problems are you going to solve and how is it going to make the customer experience better than what it was or is today? And so I think sometimes we just get enamored with the technology and our product, and we got to do that in tandem with the problems that we're
Mhm.
looking to solve.
I made this point with Jeff Gotthelf the other day when we recorded an episode, and I basically said that, look, instead of just like trying to hammer AI into your product because you think it's on vogue, unless you change the pricing afterwards, your idea probably was not that good, right? Like it should really provide substantial benefit to your customer. Otherwise, it's just not worth it. And I think you said a very good thing there. So, for my last point, I really would like to touch on this. Maybe if you have an opinion on this, if we think about the broader messaging as okay, we need to understand the customer and we need to deliver them value. How do you think about, because you are in this particular segment, but how do you think about account based marketing? Like if you have to really big accounts. So, like, how do we now narrow this down even more? Instead of now the entire market, we have this one account that is really big. So what is the marketing's function there? How do you look at this right now? Because you have a company that is selling very much up market, and you definitely have account-based marketing, I would assume.
We do.
um, how do you look at that particular role?
So we do account-based marketing. It's hard not to in B2B. It becomes a question of how sophisticated are you at doing that and doing it really, really well. So we are just at the tail end of implementing an ABX solution, and we've implemented some other technologies as well so that we can get to a place where we can grab intent data and start personalizing an experience based on what we know of the account and the buying committee. So all of that is under construction, and we're just about over the finish line on that. But it really does start with alignment with your sales organization to make sure that there is an agreement on who is your ideal client profile, so ICP,
Mm,
and which accounts do we truly want to go after and how do we do that? And so that alignment between your commercial and your marketing organization is super important, but it's also understanding what are the right sales and marketing motions that you got to deploy at any moment in time based on how these different buyers search for information, consume information, and making sure that the orchestration is really clear between teams. So
yeah,
we've done a lot of work just to get kind of in the weeds a little bit, Leah. We had to do a lot of work in terms of making sure that we understood our ideal client profile and that there were good processes in place between marketing and sales in terms of who's going to be outreaching when based on where an account is in their journey with us, and the right handoffs. And then the personalization is really, really important. And so as soon as you get to know the organization a little bit more, personalizing that experience. And what I mean by that is not just simply saying, well, here's a message for a chief digital officer. That's not it. This is
yeah,
how do you get how do you get them to actually see without having purchased yet the value that you're going to provide specific to their own organization. And so we
yeah,
spend a lot of time grabbing data from them in advance, doing some ROI modeling based on what we do know to be true. That if you're here, we know we can take you to point B. We do mock ups of what their environment would look like, but it really has to get down to personalizing it based on the impact that you
yeah.
can drive for the organization because they're not going to buy. So it's not just a message, it is actually that relationship is pretty tight even before they decide to do business with you because it's going to be a big investment for them and it's going to change their business.
Yeah, this is such a good point. And I want to just underline what you just said right now again. I think for the longest time, we kind of expected sales to make the business cases for the customers and say, like, look, this is the amount of money that you can make. Now you just mentioned something really interesting, right? Like, we need to actually make the ROI case for our customers. We need to show them what they can do. Now, again, same problem as before. If you do not know how a specific account works, how big they are, what kind of operations they have in specific countries, you cannot make a good business case for them either. It just does not work. And the same goes back to product again as well, where I just said, like, also internally, you cannot make a business case if you do not know to whom you sell, what you are building, and how you're marketing it afterwards. You need to have the entire story anyways, regardless in which function that you work. So I really, really like this. And I think account-based marketing is a very good example of this, because you're becoming a market researcher for a very specific subsegment of the market. Something that everybody should do, to be honest, right? Like if you
Ah,
do not have regular contact, then what are you doing?
yeah, right. Well, and I think too that just we talked a little bit about AI, but even the power of AI in making us smarter about what we know of our buyers, and how do you bring those insights into the hands of your sales team so that when they are engaging, they have some degree of intelligence of what people are already searching for and what's motivating them. And so those insights that marketing has, whether they're lagging indicators or leading indicators,
Yeah.
all of those need to be fed, because it's going to make you smarter. No one likes to be, I mean, I can't stand it when a company reaches out to me, multiple people. It's like, do you guys not talk? Because your colleague over here just reached out to me as though they don't know that you're reaching out. And it's like, you guys need
Mhm.
to, it's a bad experience.
Yeah. It is the worst if you get handed off from marketing to customer success, does not know what kind of campaign they were actually looking at. And then customer success hands you off to sales, and then sales does not know what customer success was
Right.
talking about. Great experience. Exactly what we want to have.
Yeah.
Like talk to
I
four
feel
different
so
people.
important that you guys,
Yeah.
it's,
But then you get marketing messages or like outreach on LinkedIn, like, "Hey Jamie, I saw that you liked this post of our CEO at the same time. So I went to the same school as him. So good, let's connect. Here's why you should buy our product."
I know. No, not interested. Just because I went to school with your CEO does not make me interested. In fact,
Yeah, not exactly.
not even relevant to me.
Jamie, how should people reach out to you? Do you want them to reach out to you? Who should reach out to you, and how should they do it? Should they do it through LinkedIn, through email? Should they come up and just ring at your door? Who do you want to hear from?
Well, it'd be a little creepy if they came and rang my doorbell, but you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's always a really good starting point. You can find me on there pretty easily. And look, I'm always looking to have conversations with people and swap stories. And I'm a learner too. So I love my LinkedIn community for that very reason. But that's the best place to reach me.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for spending this hour with me. This was a great conversation, and I hope you had fun too.
I had a great time. Thank you.
And that's it. We're done. Boom. Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.